Hello and welcome to the SRA podcast. Today we have a very special interview with our guest, Kim Kelly, independent journalist with Teen Vogue.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Definitely a big fan of your work. So you've been writing for Teen Vogue and various other publications for quite a while, but I know that you started out actually writing about the metal scene. So would you be interested in talking about that some?
Yeah, for sure. It's such a funny thing to me at this point that I guess I am sort of better known as a labor political journalist because I've been this is still very new to me. I've been writing about heavy metal since I was 15. That's been my life for the past 17 years, and I've had a whole career in metal. But I sort of pivoted, as a lot of people did, I think, in around 2016 when I never lost interest in metal. Metal, I still love it. I still write about it. It's always going to be part of my life. But I kind of got burned out. And at the time, I was working at Vice as their heavy metal editor, which is not a job that exists anymore. But I sort of forced the issue while I was there. And working at Vice sucked anyway. But I ended up getting kind of burned out because I was getting harassed a lot, more than usual. To the point where I can safely say it is less stressful to write about labor and political issues in 2020 than it is to write about black metal if you're a loudmouthed anarchist feminist like me.
Definitely. There's been a long history of sort of neo-Nazism in the heavy metal and especially the black metal scene. And I think you've always taken a pretty firm stance against that, even when it means you get some harsh backlash from fans, some of whom might be actual Nazis.
Oh, there's definitely a Nazi problem in black metal specifically. But throughout metal, heavy metal as a genre, as a community, as a worldwide phenomenon, there is a deep-rooted reactionary streak that I think has really come to the fore in a lot of ways post-2016 because that part has always been there, but there's also been a resistance to it. And, people pushing for something better since the jump. Metal has always been political. And there have always been people on the left who are involved in metal. It's just they didn't always have the biggest platforms. But there's been a very intentional new wave of people, of fans and artists and labels who are pushing back against those reactionary elements to try and sort of take metal back and make it better because metal is too good for Nazis.
Absolutely. Especially, has there ever been anything in the metal scene, sort of like the skinhead movement in punk, like Sharp, like the sort of anti-Nazi skinhead movement? Is there any sort of equivalent to that?
I wish. My boyfriend's a Sharp, so I get an earful all the time about how my genre sucks. But I don't know that it's gotten to that point of sort of overt militancy that we saw in the 80s with the Skins and the Sharps. It needs to get there, but I don't think it's specifically there yet. But I think that the desire's there. I think people are very, the people who care about these things, the people who are on the left, who are invested in this kind of politic, they are kind of getting to a breaking point. We've already seen a lot of efforts to shut down shows and deplatform Nazi bands and racist, rapist, all kinds of fucked up bands. That's been an ongoing wave, and I think we're going to continue to see that, especially ramping up to this next cursed election when really God knows what's going to happen, but I can only assume that the Nazis are going to continue to try and ruin everything for everybody else. So it's a matter of time, I suppose.
I do want to give a shout out to, I'm in the LA area. I want to give a shout out to a local group, Long Beach Antifa, who successfully got a Nazi band on tour deplatformed from all but one of their venues in the LA area. So there is definitely some movement on that, and I think that's really good to see.
Oh, amazing. Hell yeah.
Awesome. So how did you make this sort of pivot from being a music journalist, a heavy metal journalist and reviewer, to sort of the more labor issues, and especially with Teen Vogue, which I think has sort of surprised everyone with its political slant the past few years?
Right. So, the way I got into the way I became a labor reporter was by getting involved in labor, right? I helped organize my workplace when I was at Vice for almost 5 years, and for I think about 4 of those years, we were either organizing or bargaining or organizing other parts of the company or bargaining again. My entire career at Vice, most of the time I was kind of treating our union like a second job that it didn't pay, but Vice barely did either. So it kind of worked out. So I got to a point where I was so involved and so invested. I've always been, on the left. I've been anarchist for a long time. I grew up in a union household. Like working class issues, working class resistance have always been something that interest and applied to me. But I never really thought that I had the right sort of background or the right kind of credibility as a journalist to write about these issues, until I actually went and did it and got involved in organizing and got sort of knee deep in this whole world. So I got to a point where I didn't feel like it would be totally out of left field if I emailed an editor, because I was still freelancing at the time because I have a lot of interest and Vice pays like shit. So I was freelancing at the time, and I got to a point where I felt like it wouldn't be completely bizarre for me to email an editor because, the metal chick who works at Vice emailed me about a labor story versus the metal chick who works at Vice, who is super involved in the union and bargained 2 contracts, is emailing me about a union story. Like there's a little bit more credibility there, I think. And I sort of used that to my advantage in a way. And the Teen Vogue connection, that one is still really funny because it's still Teen Vogue, like those 2 words together associated with the kind of things that I get to cover and the other writers there get to cover. It's still kind of bonkers. But I got involved with them back in 2017. And I wasn't even thinking about this particular line of coverage at that time. I wrote a few pieces about like prison stuff, like prison industrial complex issues. And then I had developed a good rapport with my editor there. She's not there anymore, but we still keep in touch. She's an angel. But I pitched her a profile on Mother Jones, the labor leader. So I thought, oh, okay, cool, like figure from the past, strong woman, anti-capitalist icon, she'd be great. Like the youth would love that. Maybe, I don't know. I'm old. I don't know what the youth like, but I gave it a shot. And my editor said that, yeah, this sounds kind of cool, but the problem is I don't know that our readership will be familiar with what a union is. So why don't you write an explainer of that? So I did that, and that kind of popped off in a way people didn't quite expect, because at 2017, nobody really expects Teen Vogue to be writing about labor stuff. Like at the time, that was a novel thing to have happened. And I sort of parlayed the success of that first piece into being able to write more regularly there and getting a column. And now I have a really good relationship with my editor there, and she lets me get away with a lot. So, yeah, now here we are. And I've gone on to currently write about labor for a whole lot of other publications too that have a little less novelty factor involved, but are still, I'm still doing serious stuff. It's just not as much fun as Teen Vogue because, I still get a kick out of it, and I've been doing it for like 3 years.
So what would you say do you feel is the most important story that you've covered in the past few years on this beat? What was the most popular, or what do you think was the most impactful that you think maybe didn't receive enough attention?
Oh gosh, I write a lot. I kind of churn things out, so it's hard to pick just one, I think. But I will say one piece I really enjoyed and really got to kind of sink my teeth into was I did a big profile on Sarah Nelson, the president of the AFA-CWA, the Flight Attendants Union. We got to spend some time together, and I got to do like a 4,000 word profile on her. She's it takes a lot for me to be excited about any kind of, elected leader, official type person, but she's the real deal. And I really enjoy getting to know her and getting to do what little part I could do to help propel her into the national spotlight, because she's a real one, and the labor movement really needs more leaders like her. And on top of that, just any time that I've been able to write about and elevate the voices of, incarcerated workers, sex workers, people who are coming from more marginalized backgrounds, who are paid hourly, who are low wage workers, just the kind of stories that I know it's very important to be covering like tech worker organizing and white collar organizing, and like there's so many labor stories everywhere, but I always want to do what I can to make sure that the stories that maybe aren't quite as sexy or aren't quite as clicky are still getting out there, because those people matter too. Like I wrote a piece for the New Republic a couple of months ago just about how the Trump administration basically fucking with regulations in slaughterhouses. So people who are working in, you know, abattoirs and like pork factories essentially are now under much greater risk of injury or illness, or, you know, the products that they're making are gonna be come out fucked up. Like it's a, you know, it's not super fun to write about slaughterhouses, you know, but people work there and their stories matter too. So that's what I'm trying to do at the very least.
Absolutely, and I think you've done a great job. In fact, your story on slaughterhouses and the difficulties there actually popped up in my newsfeed, completely independent of me following you elsewhere. So you definitely do have a voice that I think is reaching a lot of people. You mentioned a little bit talking about the sort of places where labor organization is happening that people might not think about or hear about. One of those that I think a lot of people don't really think about and that you've done a lot of work in is freelance organizing, especially for journalists and writers trying to fight against, it sounds like there are a lot of scummy editors and publications out there that, based on the journalists I follow, will pay people late or underpay or make promises and not keep them. And it sounds like you've been active in trying to organize against that sort of behavior. Could you talk about your experiences in that?
Right. Yes. I've been freelancing for a really long time. Even when I had a job, even when I was like, before I worked at Vice, I was on tour with heavy metal bands. Like I've had a lot of weird jobs, but I've always been a freelancer, and I've always, had to deal with what that entails. But it applies to all kinds of other disciplines too. But in my particular, area of experience, freelance journalist, freelance writer, you're doing the most work, but you're the lowest person on the totem pole. And you don't really have any control over what's happening to your work, right? Because the process is, if you're freelance, you email an editor, send them a pitch, they like it, you negotiate a rate. If you're at a point where you can negotiate, or if you even know that that's a possibility. For the first, 10 years of me being a freelancer, I didn't even realize that you can negotiate and ask for more money. And that's even, and there's, a privileged dynamic to that. Not everybody can even do that. So you're already starting out maybe getting nickel and dimed, or maybe getting paid worse because you're not as friendly with the editor, or you don't have as many people following you on Twitter, or you're from a marginalized background that doesn't resonate with whatever white guy who's probably in charge. There's a lot of variables. And then there's no real protections in terms of labor law, because most freelancers are independent contractors who were kind of left out to sea. In terms of taxes and in terms of really having any kind of leverage. And it's been really gratifying to see in the past couple of years. There's specifically two projects that I think are really exciting, and I'm glad to be kind of plugged into in various degrees to both of them. There's the National Writers Union has the Freelance Solidarity Project running, which is great. And then the IWW have the Freelance Journalist Union, and they both are working on kind of different projects and different facets of the industry, but it is all the same struggle. And it's, it especially now with the world being even more on fire than usual, it feels a little lame to whine about how hard it is to be a freelance writer. But that's also part of the way they get you, right? Where we think, oh, I'm just a writer, I'm just a blogger, I just write words on the internet. But you're still putting labor into it. You're still creating something of value, and you're still a worker, and you still deserve respect and rights and to be paid for your goddamn work.
That goes all the way back to Karl Marx. Karl Marx, a lot of people don't know this, while he was a philosopher and economist and all this, he was actually a journalist, a foreign correspondent for the New York Tribune for about 30 years, which was his main source of income aside from Frederick Engels.
Yeah, I've been in pubs in London where he had his writing corner shows up. It's radical. It's not the easiest thing in the world to try and work in the journalistic field when you are a radical, or when not even radical, just you give a shit and you realize that objectivity is a myth and that perhaps we could improve society somewhat. But we're still getting past these hurdles, whether you're in like legacy journalism where you're not even allowed to have an opinion, or in the sort of wild west of progressive hipster journalism, whatever that we've seen in like the Vice Gizmodo whatever sphere. Like, it is a strange time to be a journalist, and it's a strange time to be freelance for sure, because you still, even with all the efforts that are being made, you still, you know, it's still a hustle, it's still a grind, and it's really scary in a way too, because that, like, right now, dealing with the current crisis, the traffic numbers at tons of sites are up because so many people are stuck at home and people are desperate for news, but the advertising revenues are down. So we're seeing lots of layoffs. We're seeing budgets being slashed. We're seeing editors just kind of pulling back from taking freelance pitches. And the media is going to shrink in a way that I think we can't even really comprehend yet. And it is scary. So I'm really glad that people are organizing around the issue to try and kind of head things off the pass and make sure that everything doesn't fall apart.
Yeah, because it sounds like there's been a number of different people keep describing them as apocalypses in journalism, first with print media, then with various changes to the way that advertising revenue works on Facebook and Google have really impacted news sites and journalism. And it sounds like it's a segment that's just under a lot of squeeze and is like getting consistently chopped down because it doesn't make money for investment firms, or more or less.
No one has really figured out how to profit off of digital media, like digital news, yet. They keep trying and they keep failing, and the people at the top who have all the money keep being employed and keep having new opportunities to run other people's lives. But those of us who are actually writing the stories and editing the stories and getting the stories out there in front of people, we're always the first people to end up on the chopping block. And I don't know what the answer is. I, of course, would love to see the entire media sort of pivot to a worker-owned cooperative model. I don't know how pie in the sky that is. I don't know how, I mean, who knows, right? Like, at this point, I don't think there's anything in this world that is a certainty. So if people want to get together and try and start something new and reshape the media, then we should do it. And if people want to try and cling to the vestiges of the fourth estate, then, well, good luck to them, I guess.
Awesome. So changing subject a little bit, you're a member of the SRA. I think you joined last year. So what's your sort of relationship to firearms and radical politics, and how has your experiences in the SRA been so far?
Right. Well, I've written a little bit about this, and I am, I guess, probably a pretty similar position to a lot of people that are part of the organization, where I grew up around guns. I've always been comfortable with them. I've always kind of seen them as essential tools because my family are hunters, and I grew up in a really rural area, and like that's how my dad kept food on the table, right? You know, like it never seemed controversial to me that people would own guns or kind of have guns lying around the house because, like, oh, that's what you use to go get dinner. Like, I didn't realize that was a controversial or perhaps unique thing until I, started getting bused to the big high school an hour away and met other people that didn't grow up like that, and quickly realized that, like, oh, okay, people have some real strong opinions about this. Huh. And then I just sort of had it in the back of my mind for a long time. I didn't really think about it as much until I started really doing more reading, getting more involved in radical politics and thinking about, what self-defense really means, what community defense really means, and, utilizing as many tools as possible as you can in the struggle against, fascism and capital. And I've been shooting fairly regularly for the past year or so. It's sort of funny. Well, not funny because everything's terrible, but it's ironic that I was working on getting the right state ID so I could go and get my first handgun, but then all this happened, and now I gotta wait for God knows how long. Just because I enjoy shooting and I enjoy knowing that, I have this extra layer of protection because, I was in Charlottesville. I've been in some real weird places, And I've seen what it looks like when people show up. Like in Charlottesville, it's Redneck Revolt. In other places, it's been other groups and other people. I've seen what it looks like when people show up from the community and make it clear that they're there to defend people. And what it looks like when the cops are there and then people who are armed are there. And just seeing the interactions between them, it becomes very apparent that, you know, you don't want to be unarmed in this sort of situation. Yeah, I mean, I'm still getting familiar and getting comfortable with everything. I'm a decent shot, I'll say, but I'm still a baby. I just got, it's funny, well, it's not funny. My granddad passed away recently, and he told me before that happened that I could just go nuts on whatever he had in the basement. And so I have this pile of like, he has this bizarre like homemade black powder handgun thing that he made. Like, what do I do with this? He had some things that like he theoretically perhaps should not have, which I do not have. But yeah, my family, there's just guns everywhere. Like it's not weird to me. And I am glad that I found an organization like SRA, especially one in my own backyard, where education and solidarity are kind of the biggest parts of it. I haven't been as plugged in as I would have liked to be, just because I've had a really chaotic sort of, well, life. But in the past year especially, things have been really chaotic. I've been traveling a lot for work. But one of the small upsides of the current state of things is that I've had more time to like get on Discord and, you know, get on Zoom and talk to other people in the chapter and like try to plug into projects and other mutual aid efforts that are happening. And it's just been really nice to have that kind of community too. I mean, obviously you're pro SRA because you're you, but I think it is a really good organization, and I'm glad that people are also kind of doing the work to destigmatize firearms ownership and interest in firearms, because for so long the right wing has sort of held a monopoly on that, to the point where oftentimes you can't even discuss the idea of guns or owning guns to somebody without getting a really visceral reaction, which is generally not warranted. Because like every person, I know some reporting around leftist gun ownership too, which, yeah, I'm biased, but that kind of helps it. People don't want to talk to you if they think you're going to try and fuck them over, especially in like a big publication. So I think being open about my stance around firearms has made it easier for people to be interested in talking to me, and I've had some really cool stories come out of that. Like when I went to Seattle last summer? Earlier this year? Time is a flat circle at this point. But fairly recently, I went to Seattle and spent some time with the John Brown Gun Club out there. And that was a really wonderful experience. I learned a lot, and I got to write about that. And I had people that, like, in my life who are not at all gun people or even generally okay with the idea of gun ownership kind of message me or comment an article and be like, okay, I kind of see what you mean. I kind of get it now, I think. Even if I'm not going to buy one, I kind of understand why people would want to protect themselves in this way. And I think that's getting us a little tiny bit closer to where we need to be, where it's not this terrifying taboo that someone likes to go shooting or someone has a firearm. Like, as long as they're trained and they're on top of their shit and the other people trust them, then it's not the end of the world if somebody has a gun. It just isn't.
Absolutely. And I'm really glad to have people like you in our organization who have the history of journalism and organizing and activism that you do. And I really appreciate the work that you've done. So I think we're coming up on the end of our time. Is there anything else that you would like to discuss? Any projects you're working on that you would like to plug?
Oh gosh, I mean, everyone has a Patreon right now, but I have one too. I started over the summer, Tucker Carlson got real mad at me, actually, for tweeting about William Vance Bronson, who, as we know, out in Tacoma was murdered by the police as he was trying to thwart an ICE raid. And after Tucker Carlson did a whole segment on me, which was a little much, I would say, but I lost a lot of work around that. So I launched this Patreon? I still can't say it.
Patreon?
Patreon? Who's to say? Whatever. I launched one of those just because I do worry that at some point I might end up being a little too scary for people, especially because I'm not anti-gun. But if you want to see what I'm up to, that's a good thing. I'm very online, terminally online. Follow me on Twitter. Yeah, I don't know. Besides that, I'm just trying to figure out the best ways to be useful and not lose my mind in the process, which I guess is what we're all kind of trying to do.
What else can we do? Well,
girl, who knows? Not me.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been wonderful having you, and solidarity.
Oh, thank you so much.